Welcome to the Return on Lifestyle podcast with Ray Descalzo from Privada Wealth Management. In this podcast, we help you overcome financial worries and make sense of planning, investing, insurance, and banking. Join us for this journey as Ray draws from his expertise and interviews brilliant minds to help you enjoy life. The best is yet to come.
Hello and welcome to Return on Lifestyle with Ray Descalzo from Privada Wealth Management. Today we're going to be doing part 2 of stability planning. This is a series that Ray's taken us through. And today we're covering rules-based investing. Ray, good morning. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, absolutely. Stability planning is your unique approach to financial planning. And last week you covered 4 factors, correct?
That's right.
All right. This week, we are looking at the investment philosophy, which you call rules-based investing. Do you want to jump into that, or do we want to give the audience just a brief review of what we covered last week in case they're joining us?
Yeah, let's review because it kind of one builds on the other. So stability planning is the way we do business here at Privada Wealth Management and how we approach financial planning. One of those things that we mentioned first was 4 factors. And the 4 factors is a way to look at your portfolio. And it's a great podcast if you haven't already heard it. And it really helps because it'll give the bigger framework for where each part of your portfolio kind of applies. And so when we talk about financial planning, we're not just talking about investment management, but investment philosophy and investment analysis is important. And the 4 factors are a way to analyze your portfolio. Mm-hmm. And those 4 factors, just so we can recap, they were, and they still are actually, liquidity, potentiality, fee potential, growth and yield potential, and then, of course, volatility and stability potential. And those are the 4 things you should look at when you look at your portfolio. So as we look at your portfolio through those 4 factors, what comes next is having a philosophy of investing that takes those 4 factors into account and applies them. And we call that rules-based investing.
All right. Then where do we start today with this?
Well, first of all, let's take a look at a quick analogy. And I think we've said this one before, but it bears repeating. Let's just say we decide, you and I, we're going to climb Mount Everest, right? And we pack our bags. When we're at the bottom of Mount Everest, what's the whole point of climbing Mount Everest?
Absolutely to get to the top. I want to see that view. Getting to the top is a big deal. But you know what your friends and family would probably also like to hear you say? Getting back down again, right? True, yeah.
Yeah, good point.
Most of them.
Every time I ask that question, everybody, they picture themselves at the bottom of this big mountain and they look at the very tippy top and they say to themselves, hey, man, that is great. That's my goal. Actually, no, I would add one more thing. I would add getting back down the mountain. And so when it comes to investing, everybody talks about piling up a lot of money, accumulating as much possible dough as you possibly can. And that's great. But we have to do it in such a way that we don't crash and burn on the way up. And we don't crash and burn on the way down. And I use that analogy because ultimately, I don't know if you know this, but of the deaths that happen on Mount Everest, not to be too macabre, 85% of the deaths happen on the descent, not on the
Really?
climb.
I did not know that.
Yeah, you can look it up. It's a British Journal of Medicine did a report, and they found out that is what happens. And so I would say that the analogy applies in that what we want to do is we want to make sure that we don't make big mistakes when we're climbing that mountain. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to make big mistakes when we are descending that mountain. And that's where rules-based investing comes in. And really what rules-based investing means is that we use indicators to tactically adjust our portfolios for more risk or reward or less risk and reward, depending on how the market is acting. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. But you hear a lot about the wisdom of, or what people say the wisdom is, which is just buy and hold. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And a fair one. Recently, the founder of Vanguard passed away, John Bogle, and he was a real famous guy. He was in our industry a big deal, and you've probably heard of Vanguard funds. They're well known, and it helped a lot of people invest, and that's a great thing. One of the things he said back in 2013 was that he expected in the next 10 years a decline in the stock market of 50%. And he said, hey, that's to be expected. In fact, I even have him speaking and saying that on a video on my website. And if you go to my website, click a link, email me and ask me for that video and I'll send it to you. And when he said there was 50% a chance of 50% drawdown in the market, I remember the look on the face of the interviewer there on CNBC saying, "Oh, really?" And he said, "Yeah, that's just how it works. That's not a big deal." And so with the buy and hold approach, that is something for us to consider. We have to consider the fact that there is some big volatility. And we also have to consider that we could respond much like the interviewer there on CNBC. You see, the problem that I've got with buy and hold is in all of that volatility, and volatility is one of the four factors, there is the emotions of loss. There is the gut reaction, the shock and awe that you experience when you have a big drawdown in the market. I mean, I think most of us can remember where we were in 2007 and when it comes to our portfolio, and then we can remember how we felt in 2009 in the dark spring of 2009.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And because of that, Dalbar recently released their 2017 study, which you can find on their website. And they're finding that, Americans are still terrible at buy and hold. Most of them, according to the survey, are trailing what the broad indexes can do because they're not buying and holding. And even if you could endure market downturns and just hang on, they're costly as far as the time they take and also the math.
What do you mean by time and math?
Yeah, great question. So time, well, let's take a look at it. Between 1929 and 2009, there's been 15 bear markets. And bull, bear, those are terms we talk about. When I say bear market, I'm talking about when the S&P 500, which is an index, has fallen at least 20%, right? And the average bear market slashed almost 39.4% from stock prices. Now, get rid of the 1929 crash. That was pretty special, and let's just get rid of that one. The average loss in a bear market is still 36.1%. So on average, a new bear market begins every about 5.5 years with an average duration of about 18 months. So even if you get rid of 1929, the average time loss making up bear markets, meaning you don't get any earnings, you don't get back to even, is 3.6 years. Now, let me ask you a question. Do you think you and I, as just normal human beings, are you a patient person? Does 3.6 years sound like a time you'd be willing to wait?
Yeah, not so much, Ray. No.
Yeah.
No.
So we celebrate my daughter's 5th birthday, and I think about all that I've endured, late nights, diaper changes and so forth. And I'm just so happy she's 5. I'm so happy she can take her dishes to the sink. And for me to have to go back to 2 years old again, love her, I don't know if I could do it, you know? And that's kind of what happens with your portfolio. It goes from being a nice, a healthy, happy portfolio, and all of a sudden you find yourself looking at, on the average, a long time. If you're young, that can really be a bummer. If you're putting money away, everybody's like, hey, you know what? Don't worry about it. It's going to come back. But as you get older, especially, and you reach what I call the fragile decade, which is 10 years on either side of needing the money, well, 3.6 years that's a long time. And so the time that it takes to recover from these is pretty problematic. And then there's also, so that's the time of loss. That's something you can kind of look at a calendar and say, man, what if we could find a way around that? The other thing would be the math of loss. Now, I know this is where our eyes sometimes glaze over when we talk about math, but if you don't mind, let me just kind of
please go
some
for
questions and answers. So let's do an IQ test here.
Oh boy,
for Eric. and by the way, let's just see how you do. So if you have $100, right, and you lose in 1 year, you're down 5%, let's say. What percentage return do you need to get back to $100 in the next year? It
would be the percentage of the 95, right? So it's got to be somewhat over 5%, but I don't know the exact number.
That's exactly right. That's it. It's not going to be 5%. It's going to be 5.3. Okay. Well, that's fair. And by the way, if we're down 10, the next year we need to get to 11.1 to get back to where we were. But the funny thing about that math is it is more than what you lost, but it really gets kind of scary. Now, remember, I said that the average loss was 36.1. Well, if you're down 33.3% in your portfolio, the next year, just to get back to even, you need to be up 50%.
Oh, well, that's a big jump.
Right. And so we can remember in 2008, when the market was in 2009, when the market was down big numbers, when it was down bigly, as some are wanting
Bigly,
to say.
yeah.
Exactly. But we can't really remember too many times when the market was up 50. And so that kind of illustrates that when your portfolio is down, it's going to take time, but it's also mathematically difficult for those funds. And here's the problem, and this is what Dalbar pointed out. What ends up happening is now the time and the math, and then let's put on top of that emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when people go into cash. That's, in other words, at a time when we should be aggressive, what do? We panic sell, or I shouldn't say aggressive, when we should be growth oriented, we get conservative. And at a time when we should be, I don't know, maybe the good days are gone, maybe we should relax a little bit. What do we tend to do? We tend to follow the herd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember in 2003 and 4, everybody and their brother were investing in real estate. And of course, I'm here in Central Florida, and man, everybody was doing it. You'd go to Walmart and the greeter had 2 rental properties, or was flipping condos in Miami.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And at some point, the herd, there just was nobody left. There was nobody left to buy all that property up. By 2005, 6, 7, it really got bad. And that's the herd mentality. So you've got the herd mentality on the way up where everybody's excited. And then you've got the herd mentality on the way down where instead of being able to ride it out like we're told and we're taught, according to the surveys that Dalbar does almost every single year, Americans are still pretty terrible at the buy and hold. And that's where rules come in.
Okay, so when you're talking about these rules and not buying and holding, then you're changing positions and you're making decisions. I'm not going to say on the fly. Obviously, there's a science to it, or there's a way you do it. But at the same time, we've been told time and time again, you can't time the market, and it kind of sounds like that's what you're doing.
Great question, and that I hear that a bit. And let me kind of back off just a little bit and talk about the foundational rules. First of all, the foundational rules are pretty much like you've always heard. One of those is diversification.
Mm-hmm.
Based upon modern portfolio theory, we talked about before, we know that large cap and small cap stocks act a certain way, and they have certain volatile characteristics. Some are more volatile than others. Bonds, fixed income is going to be a great ballast and offset for stocks most of the time. That's diversification. Okay. So we believe in diversification, and it is an undergirding principle. It's one of the rules. However, what we also realized is that there are times in the economy and in the market when certain indicators kind of pop up and they tell us, hey, listen, things aren't exactly safe out there. Or better yet, sometimes the market says to us through the numbers that come to us, the data that comes to us, that pretty much it's clear sailing. It's clear skies.
Mm-hmm.
The question then would be, well, then is that truly market timing? And I would say, no, it's not market timing. What it is looking at risk. And it's looking at risk and saying, is this risk worth taking based upon the numbers? These numbers are then distilled into rules, and these rules become the technical indicators that tell us whether we're going to be more towards a growth, robust, risk on concept in our portfolio, or whether we're going to say, you know what, now is not a time. We're going to look at the numbers that are coming in. We're going to look at the indicators, and we're going to decide this is a time to be risk off. So we actually, let me give you a better analogy. Here in Central Florida, I think it's probably the rain capital of the world, especially in the summer. What ends up happening is we get all this rain that gets picked up from the Gulf Coast, and then it just dumps right on us here next to Disney World. And we got a lot of people from up north. We got a lot of people who are traveling here and so forth, not used to driving in the rain.
Mm-hmm.
So what happens is with these massive storms is we drive different when it's raining, right? So I'm driving down the road, and if it's a beautiful day, like it is today, actually, it's just gorgeous out, not a cloud in the sky. And I'm on one of these, the turnpike, for instance, which basically is empty on a Monday afternoon. And I look around and, the speed limit is 70 miles an hour. Let me ask you a question. You've been in that kind of situation, Eric. How fast do you think you would go if the speed limit is 70 miles an hour? It's just, as far as the eye can see, you don't see anybody, beautiful, dry day, and you got the tunes cranking. How fast do you think you drive?
Oh, I'm averaging about 4 over because I like to be a little safer, but I like to go a little faster as well.
Oh,
I don't push it
now
too
4.
much. Not
Tell
too
me
much.
about that number 4. Why 4?
Because I think that if I hit 5 miles an hour over, then I'm going to catch somebody's attention. It's just something in my brain. I don't know. That's where I'm at.
That's funny. That's so funny you should say that, because my number is 9.
Oh, that'd be nice, but I think I'd get nailed.
But isn't it weird that you and I both came up with this number that through our, and perhaps maybe that's even a little risk reward indicator of itself. You had a thought, look, if it's 70, I go 74. The police are going to say, look, that's a rounding error, right? And I did the same thing too. If I'm going 80, I probably should be pulled over. That's kind of fast. But if I'm going 79, I can say, oh, well, I wasn't 10 miles over. I was 9. Obviously, that's not scientific by any means, but we both had that in our heads. That's really cool. I've never met a 4. So you're a 4, by the way.
Yeah. Well, thanks. Let me know.
But that's awesome that you've said, okay. And do you use cruise control?
Yeah, quite a bit of the time, depending on what I'm driving.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially on those, long family trips, you book on tape and you just hit the 4 over and you go.
Exactly.
Now, conversely, on that same interstate, and this happened to me actually a while back ago, on that same interstate, or in this case, turnpike, it's a 70 mile an hour speed limit. When those storms come, man, it is, 3:00 in the afternoon, and it can just get a deep, dark purple sky. I mean, it is, you don't know it's daytime. And then the rain comes down so hard that, you get the wiper to go, you see kind of a snapshot of what's in front of you, a blurry snapshot, and then it becomes you're underwater, and then back and forth. In that kind of a situation, how fast do you think you'd go?
Oh, much slower. I mean, I've got to be able to see. Obviously, you take safety into concern and all that, and slick roads, and then other drivers. So, definitely slowing down to the point where the windshield wipers are doing a better job of allowing me to see.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. So it's hard to even give you a number. It's hard to say, hey, I'd go 40 or I'd go 35.
Yeah, exactly.
But what I've noticed is, and especially here in Florida, and unfortunately, a lot of folks here in Florida think that you're supposed to turn on your blinkers and then just drive 40 miles an hour. You're not supposed to do that. By the way, just, let's just take a break from investing. Let's just give some driving tips here.
Exactly.
You don't turn on your blinkers and keep driving. That's not what those are for. That just means you're confused. And anyways, don't do that. But a lot of folks do, and they slow down. And it's a 70 mile an hour turnpike, and they're going 50, 45, 40. And I've been in situations, and maybe you have too, where it's raining like that. And I think to myself, you know what? I don't really care how much forward progress I make. If I have another semi, pull out in front of me and kick up a big rooster tail of water, I won't be able to see anything, I've had friends who've hydroplaned where they were basically skiing in their cars, and nothing they could have done would have changed that. And that thought comes to me, and you know what I do? I pull over. I pull over on the next exit, rest area, pull into a McDonald's, do what you got to do, but you just get off the road because there's no making forward progress.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we do the same thing here. We'll get storms come through that have pretty large hail, and so you'll find a group of us underneath an overpass, parked. Yeah, because you find a good safe spot to ride out the storm.
Yeah, no shame in that. And the analogy is using the indicators that we use. We follow the same philosophy, and that is that there is no shame in going into the underpass. There's no shame pulling over to McDonald's and getting yourself a Happy Meal, cup of coffee, and just waiting it out, because the risk and the reward, it's just no payoff. And what happens is we have this ability to, and this mandate, if you will, to invest money in such a way that we have this understanding of the markets, that there are times of really extreme storms. And there's also some times when, man, the weather is fantastic. Now, everybody hears that and they say, oh, well, that sounds fantastic. I would love in 2008, instead of being down, 30, being down 10. Oh, and by the way, no one wants to be down 10, but being down 10 is by an order of magnitude better than being down 30, right?
Absolutely.
And everybody loves that idea and that concept. The question that I get then when I speak to people about this philosophy and these techniques of rules-based investing is they say to themselves, well, how good are you? In other words, what kind of performance can I expect? And I would compare it. I would go back to the weather analogy. We're not perfect. We don't try to, and we don't claim to buy at the very bottom. and sell at the very top. And here's why. Because the rules that come in, or rather the data that comes in based upon the rules, there's some lag time. There are trends that begin to develop, and those trends inform the numbers and they grow, much like storm clouds grow. And so I would ask you, how accurate are your meteorologists?
Never know. It changes by the hour is the problem.
Right. Now, I know you and I both know that in the spring, it's going to be nicer than it was in the winter. And we know that the summer is going to be hotter than it was in the spring. We kind of know in general that there are these seasons. And we also know that in these seasons, there are some relatively higher statistics, if you will, of rain versus dry, depending on where you live in the country, right?
Yep.
It drives me crazy because I have all these weather apps and they'll say, oh, it's going to rain, it's going to do this. And they're not going to be perfect. They're not. They're going to look at the data that's always moving, and they're going to do their very best. And the best analogy I think I have is here in Florida, we get these things called hurricanes. Have you heard of our situations down here in Florida with hurricanes?
Yeah, I heard it's not real fun.
No, it's not. And I'll tell you why it's not fun. It's not fun because when there's a hurricane out in the Caribbean, we really don't know, A, how bad it's going to be, or B, if it's going to hit us directly, you know? So the last big one that I can recall was Hurricane Irma. And with Hurricane Irma, it was going to be, pretty bad. And it turned out that for us, we were very lucky. And it came up to, this is Central Florida now. There's another one I think that hit over in the Panhandle. But for us here in Central Florida, it hit us and we were prepared for it. It didn't hit us when they said, the eye of the storm didn't hit exactly where they were going to say. But the point is the entire state of Florida was ready. Okay. They were ready and they were ready to batten down their hatches. For me, it meant I lost power for about 7 days. The weatherman couldn't have predicted that. He couldn't have known for sure that tree was going to snap and hit the power line outside my subdivision. And by the way, my subdivision was without power for 7 days. All the subdivisions around us were up and running in about 2 or 3. So that was a lot of fun to watch them all have their air conditioning while we were there in 95-degree weather.
Yeah.
It is what it is, though. They warned us, not perfectly, so we prepared. Now, the problem is I've also been through cycles where they say the end is coming, and it diverts off to another state, or the hurricane disappears on its own, it hits North Carolina, hits Louisiana. They don't know. So there are times when it's not perfect, but we have a sense that, hey, there's a hurricane season, there's something coming, and we can prepare. And so when we talk with folks about investing, the reason that's key is because if you're accumulating money, if you're climbing Mount Everest, what we want to do is we want to make sure you don't fall so hard, you break something and don't feel like continuing on. If you're coming down the mountain, the same thing. We want to make sure that you go as fast as you can and no faster, because that volatility in the coming down the mountain, that would be the distribution phase, big losses, and you're taking income. Boy, that can be very, very problematic. So having these rules, what it's done for us is it allows us to say, look, there are non-emotional, mechanical, repeatable processes that overlay the principles of buy and hold, the principles of modern portfolio theory, of diversification, and the whole thing, that provide me yet another layer to say, hey, I've got something that I can trust in, and gives us another layer to do what other people aren't doing, which is stick to a plan and to endure what you hear on the news, all the emotions and all the things that are happening around us when our portfolio is in the midst of some potential volatility.
Yeah, I keep thinking about what you said earlier with the example of math of loss, because the math is actually against us in both directions. Your example of $100, right? Let's just use these numbers. If you lost 50% and then gained 50% the next year, you're only at $75, right?
Right.
It's the same of the reverse. If you have $100 and you gain 50% and then lose 50%, you're at $75.
Right.
So knowing that and knowing, what those indicators are saves you from, even if there's, it's a great year and you're up that 50%, it can save you from that next year, which, could potentially be down 50%. So either way, I think that's a very valuable system. So how do you introduce this to a client?
I asked them about their investment experience, and we talked to them about what it felt like. Where were you in 2009 when you got that statement and you're like, I'm never going to retire? Because we forget, especially after a year like 2017, when everybody was making money hand over fist. There was no volatility at all.
Yeah.
People forget what it's like. And then a 2018 happens. And I think it's a little bit of a blessing for us to remember that the market's a dangerous place, and we've got to have those systems and procedures. The beautiful thing about math is it really doesn't care how I feel, and if you can have, with a 5-year-old daughter, a lot of things are based upon feeling and a lot of things are based upon mood. And part of being an adult is understanding that there's just certain rules. There's certain rules that guide your life. One of the laws is the law of gravity. I know you like jumping on your bed. I know it feels good now, but when you fall off, that pain is not worth it. And so the math that we have, the numbers that feed to us what's going on out there, it's pretty comforting, ironically, to know that there's something that's non-emotional that helps us to make that. And what we like to do is we like to go over everybody's risk tolerance and really quantify it to make sure that we have a good conversation. And then I want to talk with them about what it feels like to have that stress test on your portfolio.
Yeah.
And so we walk through that, and we try to constantly educate folks on how the indicators work, what those indicators are, how they work together, so that people can become educated and can become more confident and be able to make it all the way up and all the way down.
Fantastic. Hey, Ray, can you give us just a brief glimpse of what we're going to be talking about next time, what part 3 of stability planning is going to be?
Sure. Stability planning part 3, we're going to talk about the 3 L's. And those 3 L's are going to be talking to you about your longevity, your lifestyle, and your legacy. And it's the 3 buckets, if you will, that we want to take a look at when it comes to your income planning in the future, because we don't climb the mountain just to get to the top. We climb it so that we can have income on the way down. And those 3 L's, we're going to slice and dice them and explain how we're able to use those buckets, if you will, those 3 categories to really make a difference in our retirement planning. And that's the 3rd aspect of stability planning.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ray. This is a great podcast today.
Thank you, man.
You bet. And thank you all for listening to the Return on Lifestyle podcast with Ray Descalzo. If you have not subscribed to the podcast yet, please click the subscribe now button below. This way, when Ray comes out with a new podcast, it'll show up directly on your listening device. This will make it much easier to share these podcasts with your friends and family. Again, thanks for listening today. For everyone at Privada Wealth Management, this is Eric Johnson reminding you to live your best day every day. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Return on Lifestyle podcast. Click the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Privada Wealth Management. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider for any questions you may have regarding your investment planning. The following program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content. Securities offered through J.W. Cole, financial member FINRA, SIPC. Investment advice advisors are unaffiliated entities. The opinions expressed by Ray Descalzo should not be construed as specific investment, legal, or tax advice. All economic and performance information is historical and not indicative of future results. Investing may involve the risk of loss of principal. Any tax advice on this show is not intended to be used by any person for the purpose of avoiding U.S. federal or state tax penalties that may be imposed on such person, and each listener should seek advice from their tax advisor or legal counsel on topics that arise from the show. Ray Descalzo is not providing legal or tax advice. Nothing should be construed as solicitation of an offer to buy securities. The preceding program is sponsored by Privada Wealth Management, which is solely responsible for its content.